Welcome to our very special event, a screening and virtual discussion of the documentary film, The Powerbroker, Whitney Young's Fight for Civil Rights. We gathered today to celebrate the birthday of one of Young's friends and confidants, Martin Luther King Jr. 93 years after King's birth and 1 year after a violent mob attacked the US Congress, we again face the acute need for reform to protect American democracy and the civil rights of all Americans. My name is Ian Reed, and along with Professor Kevin Moncrief, I co-direct the Center for Race, Ethnicity, and Human Rights at Soka University of America in Aliso Viejo, California. Soka University was founded on Buddhist principles and offers a secular and rigorous liberal arts curriculum that stresses peace, human dignity, and the sanctity of life. Today's event has two parts. For the first hour, we will screen The Powerbroker, Whitney Young's Fight for Civil Rights, produced by Bonnie Boswell. This acclaimed and remarkable film documents Whitney Young's extraordinary story as the man in the middle between white and black, rich and poor, during one of the most turbulent times in American history. Despite becoming a target of intense criticism from both white people and the Black Power movement, Young helped erase African American stereotypes and open opportunities for minorities that continue to influence diversity in America today. This global event would not be possible without the support of President Edward Feasel and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Michael Weiner. Some of you in our audience are here because of Julesy. Please check out her organization, Smart Brown Girl, and the remarkable book club she manages. The mission of the Center for Race, Ethnicity, and Human Rights is to provide space and resources for students and faculty of Soka University of America to engage in inquiry, research, and constructive dialogue related to race, ethnicity, human rights, and their intersections. Along with my co-director, Dr. Moncrief, and our amazing student and faculty center fellows, we've worked to implement the commitment of Soka University of America's founder, Daisaku Ikeda, to global citizenship, respect for human diversity, equality, and human rights. In 2013, First Lady Michelle Obama held a special screening of the film we are about to see in the White House to mark the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. Ms. Obama spoke of the event as a chance to remember that history and to understand just how much work goes into making change. She called Whitney Young one of our unsung heroes, whose impact we still feel today. Speaking to a group of school children, she quoted Mr. Young, saying, "It is better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared." The question that Michelle Obama asked the students at that event is a good one for all of us. How can we be the agents of change, prepared for that opportunity to shine? Helping us answer that question, we are thrilled to have Ms. Bonnie Boswell, the film's producer today. As Whitney Young's niece, Bonnie imbued the film with a call for action and hope in new generations of Americans. During the second hour of today's event, we will get a chance to talk more with Bonnie about Mr. Young's enduring legacy. Welcome back to the second part of today's event to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday and extraordinary people like Whitney Young who fought for civil rights. We hope you enjoyed the film. We know that some of you are just joining us now for this second part. Since our discussion will reference the film and Whitney Young's story, please let us play just a very short 2-minute trailer to the film before introducing our esteemed guest and my colleagues as moderator.
You don't get black power by chanting it. You get it by doing what the other groups have done. The Irish kept quiet. They didn't shout Irish power or Jew power or Italian power. They kept their mouths shut and took over the police department of New York City and the mayorship of Boston.
Whitney Young's genius was he knew how to accomplish what other people were merely for.
I think that Whitney Young was a prophet. I think that he died precisely at a time when few people understood how brilliant his vision for racial transformation of American power was.
He was a figure who was calm, who was purposeful, who was measured.
Whitney Young, he's the Wall Street of the civil rights movement.
Whitney understood power and he understood politics. And most of all, he understood people. They said Martin was in the streets and Roy and Thurgood were in the courts and Whitney was in the boardroom. One could not have been successful without the other.
That was a trailer to the Powerbroker Whitney Young's fight for civil rights. At this time, I'm thrilled to introduce the film's producer and Mr. Young's niece, Ms. Bonnie Boswell. Bonnie is an award-winning producer, reporter, talk show host, and speaker. Inspired and supported by her parents and incredible family, Whitney Young, Bonnie graduated from Harvard and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She is currently the executive producer and reporter of Bonnie Boswell Reports, a feature news series that airs during the PBS NewsHour weekend on PBS SoCal. Bonnie has been a news reporter for NBC Los Angeles, where she developed a weekly feature spot for a top evening news program. She was also the producer, co-host of Lawson Live, a live call-in political talk show with legendary civil rights leader, Pastor James M. Lawson, an associate producer for ABC News 2020, and the producer of Positively Black. For her work as a producer, Bonnie has won several major awards and recognitions, including the prestigious Golden Mike Award for Seeds of Peace, starring Martin Sheen and Alfred Woodard. In addition, Ms. Boswell has published articles in the Los Angeles Times, Essence Magazine, and the Radcliffe Quarterly. She's an accomplished speaker, including at 2 TED Talks. She's spoken also and produced an NBC New York Magazine show and is broadcast editorialist for NBC New York. We wish to express our deep appreciation for hosting such an accomplished woman in the extraordinary Young and Boswell family.
Here. Am I unmuted?
There you are.
Excellent. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. And I am thrilled to be with everybody here on this Zoom call. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Ms. Boswell. It's great to have you and on such an important day. Joining Bonnie is my colleague, Dr. Kevin Moncrief, Vice President of Mission Integration. And later in the program, we're very happy that our colleague Maya Gunasaharan manager for diversity initiatives and community building, will help moderate questions from the audience. So again, welcome, Ms. Boswell. Wonderful to have you. And Kevin, thank you. At this point, I give you the podium.
Thank you very much, Professor Reed and Ms. Boswell. Thank you very much for making today's commemorative event celebrating the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. possible. We've had a few previously submitted questions for you. First, what is the relationship between your Uncle Whitney Young and Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, I think you can see from the film that they were partners. They were collaborators. That was the main thing. They were like a family. That's what that inner circle was like. Because people understood and respected that everybody had a different role to play. So as Vernon Jordan says, Martin Luther King was in the pulpit and Whitney Young was in the boardrooms, and Dorothy Height was taking care of communicating to women. So there was respect there, and they didn't always get along like families do. Always get along, but there was love, there was respect, and they worked together. And I think they was the idea that just like the parts of a watch, you need every single part to make the whole thing work.
Well, coincidentally, we found something very interesting about your family, which is showing now. Your grandfather, Dr. William Yancey Bell,
yes,
oversaw the ordination of Martin Luther King in 1942. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Yes, so this is the other side of my family. This is the paternal side of my family. My parents divorced when I was young, so I didn't really get to meet this side of the family until I was 19. Anyway, over the years, I've gotten very close to that part of the family. It came to my attention that my grandfather on that side, William Yancey Bell, who was a bishop in the CME Church, was, in many times in different pulpits. And at one point he was in Georgia. And he wrote a letter to his daughter, Aunt Bernice, telling her that he had ordained Whitney Young Martin Luther King the previous morning. And that he thought that in this letter, he said, this King fella has the goods. I think he'll go far. So I like that. I thought, that's pretty much an understatement. But anyway, I just wanted to share that because it's amazing that, that letter has come into my hands.
Well, thank you. And coincidentally, your grandfather also met with others, with then President Truman, to ask him to desegregate the military, the United States military, which Truman did by executive order in July of 1948. So going back several generations, amazing connection to power and influence, causing seismic changes in the racial chemistry in the country. Amazing. Exactly.
Thank you.
So today we're commemorating the civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. And given the mission of Soka University of America, SUA, is to foster global citizens who exemplify in the lives and actions the three characteristics of wisdom, courage, and compassion. Namely, the wisdom to perceive the interconnectedness of all life, the courage not to fear or deny difference, but to respect and understand people of different cultures and grow from encounters with them, the compassion to maintain an imaginative empathy, reaching beyond one's immediate surroundings and that extends to those suffering in distant places. Please tell us how each man, your uncle, and Martin Luther King showed these qualities.
I'd be happy to. I want to start with really some quotes from both of them on these topics. So in terms of wisdom, Martin Luther King says, "Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality." And Whitney Young said, "Every man is our brother, and every man's burden is our own. Where poverty exists, all are poor. Where hate flourishes, all are corrupted. And where injustice reigns, all are unequal." So, I think this really encapsulated their understanding of this concept of the interconnectedness of all life. And what I think is really important in telling, and I want people to walk away with remembering, is that for people in the so-called civil rights movement, and I will say why so-called, because for them it was broader than just going from one part of the bus to the next. It was really about saving the soul of America. And that literally was the slogan of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference under the direction of Dr. King, because they saw that it was much broader than blacks and whites. It was about women. It was about people in other countries. And so this understanding of the interconnectedness of all people is really central to how they viewed this struggle. And I think that this is something that we really have to keep in mind, because there is still a tendency to racialize what happens when it happens to Black people. So, for example, if George Floyd becomes somebody that we all know now because of the injustice that happened to him, it's not a Black thing, it's an injustice thing, right? And so, we have to really go broader than just seeing things on a skin tone level or a gender level, but really on a basis of fairness and justice. And this is what was in their mind as they pursued the different paths that they were to work for justice. So I want, to really share that was kind of critical to both of their way of thinking. And I think the other thing too is that, one of the things that grounded them and grounded us now, I think, is the Constitution, because this is also a part of the interrelatedness of things. And, Pastor Lawson, who was seen there in the film, talked about, the Constitution. I remember when we worked together, he was always talking about the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I want to share that because one of the things that Pastor Lawson has said is that he is unhappy that we haven't taught that as much as we need to in our schools. And this is, I'm talking to people who are in education, right, to students. And if we really can go back and use this as a point where we can have a similar North Star, which I think is the point, then I think we can have a basis for conversation for people who are maybe different from us, but who really believe in the same constitutional principles. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So, this honoring of this tradition is something that I think we need to really focus on. So that's what I would say just in terms of that particular aspect. Courage. So Martin Luther King said about courage, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. I love that, tireless exertions. So I know sometimes we get tired, right? We feel like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to end? Well, this is what struggle is about, and that's actually what life is about on a deeper level. I think that's what we've learned in terms of thinking about the interconnectedness of things. Life is not the absence of struggle. Life has the courage to look at struggle in the eye and mount whatever you need to do to overcome the obstacles, right? So this struggle gives meaning to our life. It's like a butterfly being born, it's got to go through the struggle in order to really become the butterfly. And so we should not reject struggle, although I know it's hard, but we should really be encouraged to keep going if we have, a noble mission in mind. Whitney Young said, support the strong, give courage to the timid, remind the indifferent, and warn the opposed. So I think this is, again, something that both men really exemplified in their life, courage. So Martin Luther King, when he was, facing dogs and, having the children's march where children were getting, attacked by dogs and fire hoses, to be able to deal with that, it was courageous. And of course, the threats on his own life. For Whitney Young to be courageous when, he knew that he wasn't going to be liked by everybody. I mean, he played a really difficult position because he had to walk the line in between the forces of conservatism and so-called radicalism in America. Because as we can see, we know times are tough now. We look from that movie and we could see how really fractured things were then. So, for Whitney Young, he was walking between those two. And he had to not care whether he was liked. We all want to be liked, but he had to go, you know what, that is maybe not, the most important thing. The most important thing is to get something done. And he said, I may not be the loudest voice. He said, but just say that I was effective. So I think, courage to not be liked sometimes, but to do what is right is important. And I think both of them really exemplify that point. And then compassion, the compassion to have an imaginative empathy. So Martin Luther King said, I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. And Whitney Young had to really be imaginative in terms of interpreting Black power in a way that the threatened white community could embrace it, because that, as you saw in the film, was very difficult for people to realize that somebody's not coming to take your power. No, they just want to be able to have their power. And so Whitney Young said, Black power simply means, look at me, I'm here. I have dignity, I have pride, I have roots. I insist and I demand that I participate in those decisions that affect my life and the lives of my children. It means that I am somebody. So again, I think, these men and women who, really went into the breach when it's very difficult, as difficult as it is right now. These were times when both of them grew up where they couldn't eat in any restaurant they wanted to. Now we can't imagine that. There's a lot of hostility. We know there's a lot of racism that's still an undercurrent, but things have changed in some very important ways, and they had to be courageous. So I hope that we can really take heart from that and know that, we have a job to do ourselves. All of us who are here on this call, were born in this time for a particular reason, because we have a mission. And we have a mission that each one of us can do uniquely. And so, we can follow the examples of people who've gone before us to make bridges where there were no bridges before. Just a quick example from my own life, during the pandemic, and I was busy walking around my own neighborhood. I saw signs that were, Black Lives Matter, all that kind of stuff. And I live in a integrated neighborhood, it may be too strong. It's predominantly not integrated. There are a few Black folks here and there, but I knew most of the people who had those signs up were not Black. So I decided I would go and knock on the door of those people because I wanted to know who they were. I wanted to meet them. I remember the founder of this university, Soka University, went and knocked on the doors of people that he was in a housing apartment with at one point to get to know them. And I just wanted to know, well, who are these people? Who are you? And come over to my house. So we distanced outside in my backyard. And, but I wanted to create a bridge with people that I feel like, well, maybe we have something in common. Maybe we can expand this to our neighborhoods and that kind of thing. So I think, my inspiration has really been, just sparked again by seeing this film, although I've seen it 1,000 times perhaps, but just being encouraged by the people who have come before.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Boswell. We're all curious. Please tell us about your own experience with Uncle Whitney Young.
Well, I remember Uncle Whitney primarily, my first, active memory of him was when I was put on a plane to go visit him and his family in Atlanta. And I was probably 6 years old and I was going by myself and I was scared to death. But I sat next to a soldier on the plane. I was like, okay, I'll be okay. But I knew Uncle Whitney would be on the other side waiting for me. Uncle Whitney was a big guy. And I thought, okay, he's going to be there waiting for me. And he was. And so, over the years we had, what was great about my family that I really appreciate was that my grandmother and grandfather really made a lot of effort to keep our family together. So they were writing letters to us all the time, to me as the granddaughter, Uncle Whitney. Uncle Whitney wrote my mom, everybody was always communicating. And even though we lived in different cities at that point. But that continued. We would go down to Kentucky to be, for Easter celebrations or whatever. And one time I don't have it with me right now, but there was a card that Uncle Whitney sent me when I went to Africa when I was in college. And I knew that he had not asked anybody else to pick this card out for him, because nobody would have picked, it was like a card for a 5-year-old, you know, had a little mouse on and everything. And I was like, but he said, you know, if you don't marry a prince, hurry home. You know, the point is he took the time out of his life that he was doing this, you know, and, you know, just he wanted to, you know, just to reach out. So I really appreciated his connection to me. Now, I have to say that, you know, when I was in college, I was pretty, I guess, I won't say radical, but I was definitely unhappy with, you know, the pace of things myself. And so, and I didn't really know how to think about Uncle Whitney as being a moderate. So, you know, I had to kind of work through that with him and within my own life. But again, he just constantly reached out. So I really had great warmth and feeling for him. And, you know, I still do, actually, and his mission and legacy.
That's wonderful. Before I ask the final pre-submitted question, the chat function is up and available to accept your questions. For any of those of you in the audience who would like to submit any questions to Bonnie, please feel free to do so, and from now until the remainder of this Zoom meeting. Thank you. So, how would you advise young people today, particularly the students of Soka University of America, to be global citizens right where they are right now?
That is such an excellent question. And I say that because, first of all, it's SUA, Soka University of America. Emphasis on America, right? So the globe is right out your front door. You know, we have over 80 languages spoken in Southern California, right? So the world is here. And that is why, you know, it's so important for Americans to really get involved in the spirit of this country, right? Not all that we've ever done, because sometimes, a lot of times, there has been a gap between the wonderful ideals and our practice, but the ideals are still there and they're still important. So I think that, especially as students, you are in such a great place to really, first of all, become educated yourself, even more so about the world you live in. And because, you know, education is critical to being able to develop a compassionate population. You know, if people don't have good information, or if they don't know what's going on, then, you know, it's easy to become biased, right? But if you have information, if you seek information, and it's also the seeking mind of like, I want to know more, where we don't get settled with our own ideas. But in an educational environment, you can have dialogue within your classrooms, you know, dialogue that everybody doesn't have to agree, but you can exchange ideas. And that's really what it's about, is having that kind of passion to have conversation and to really think and to challenge yourself, you know. And what happens if you don't agree? Can you respect somebody? This is something that grownups are not doing very well in the world. And so if you can master this, you know, at this point in time, I think that is really incredible. I also think really advocacy is important too, for whatever it is that moves your heart. Some, it might be climate change, other it might be, you know, making sure that people have rights to vote. These rights to vote have been long. I was going to look at the Constitution, I mean, the Declaration of Independence. Even back in the days of Declaration of Independence, they were talking about how the king, they mentioned the king basically, called together legislative bodies that were unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the repository of public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them. That was back, you know. So this is a fight that's been going on, but join it, because it's the noble fight that we can fight together, you know, and it's a fight of truth and justice. And every human being knows what that is about ultimately, right? We all want a comfortable world to live in. So whatever moves your heart, you know, find out more about it, you know, find out in the communities that you live in, that your families live in. We had 1,500 children pass from guns in last year alone, you know, by accident or intention, right? That's insane. It's just insane. But we can do something about it. We don't have to be hopeless. Hope is everything, right? That's how Whitney Young and Martin Luther King were able to go from the world they grew up in to moving the ball forward to us. So they've handed this off to us, to you, students of SUA, faculty of SUA, right? And to be able, what can I do today? It's not, making the decision today that I will win. And even though sometimes we get tired, never giving up, just refreshing and going again. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you very much, Bonnie. I am very touched and inspired by your words. This completes our portion of the event. And so now our colleague Maya Gunasaharan, Manager for Diversity Initiatives and Community Building, will take over by fielding the questions received from the audience. Take it away, Maya.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And hi, Bonnie. It's so great to be able to join you. Honestly, I kind of feel like I'm in your living room and having this incredible gift of learning about your incredible family and just the legacy of your uncle, and just more broadly too. So thank you for being with us, Bonnie, and thank you for everything you've shared so far. And really thank you for your work to share the story and the effort and the legacy of your uncle, Whitney Young. I feel, I've just learned so much through watching the documentary, and really feel like we can each learn so much from him and his legacy. And so I just want to first say thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you've done for us just already. And actually, we have many questions coming into the chat. So just a reminder to everyone on the line that for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll have questions that we can direct toward Bonnie. And so you can feel free to input a question into the chat, or if you prefer to be kept anonymous, you can direct message me and I'll happily share your question. So first, I'd start with, actually I had a couple prepared in case it was quiet, but it's not quiet, Bonnie. People have many questions. So I'm gonna start with one question that we have. Actually, you can, I think, all see it in the chat. It's coming in from Taro Gold, and Taro asks, how could the hopeful and self-empowering principles that your uncle taught be adapted by social justice movements today to create positive change?
Yeah. Well, I think thank you for that question. I think one thing that helps is to anchor ourselves in the legacy of people like Whitney Young or, Martin Luther King or so many others, who can keep us on a steady path, because it is hard to keep moving forward. But when we see what they've been through and continued, Fannie Lou Hamer, there are countless people that we can use as kind of our guideline. I think, getting ourselves familiar with their writings, their work, their life is really important. So we're not just feel like we're making it up on our own, but that we have these connections. This is a movement for justice that has been happening, for centuries. And this is on our watch, right? So I think we can have pride in that. And I think also, just really having the sense of the bigger vision all the time, so we don't get caught up in just the minutia of stuff, but to really know that, have through dialogue, just the basics of respecting the dignity of every single life, including our own, right? Because that's sometimes hard to do. Also, we get down on ourselves and get discouraged and that kind of thing. But, to know that each of us has the power of the universe in our life. We've already done the hard part in one way. We've made it to being a human being, right? Out of all the different life forms that there were and planets and this, that, and the other, we made it to being a human being, right? And it's wonderful. We can, learn how to go to the moon. We can learn how to sing. We can do all these amazing things. There's just some basic things of how to overcome our own weaknesses that we still have to learn and to challenge. So I think we should give ourselves not a hard time, but to have patience, and Martin Luther King used to, use the quote that, the arc of the universe, is long, but it bends toward justice, right? So we're on that same path. And, we take that baton from Martin King and Whitney Young.
Amazing. I love, what you talk about in terms of really taking pride in the fact that we are a part of a movement, right? That of folks who have come before us and folks who will come after us, right? Absolutely. And continue that work too. So I'm curious, sort of dovetailing on a question that I got in the chat, but also one that I had thought of while watching the film. What do you think your uncle Whitney Young would say if he were here today, right? If he could see, 2022, January 14th, with everything that's happening on a global scale, particularly, being on the heels of the beginnings of yet another racial reckoning, a global movement to really create racial justice. And also here in the US, right, experiencing attempts to disenfranchise voters, right? So if he were here, I know you can't necessarily get in his mind, but what do you think he would say if he were here today? And what do you think he would want us to keep in mind as we continue that movement that you're speaking on?
I would say that I think that he would say, keep going, don't give up, don't get swayed, keep moving forward, and to really be smart and thoughtful, because, the social programs that he initiated through the Great Society are programs that worked and are working. Even Head Start, Job Corps, these things are how we can lift everybody up together. And what happens is we can learn from the past is a lot of these programs get cut by wars. A lot of the same thing, a lot of the funding for that goes toward war. So, how do we create a peaceful society where we don't have to really use resources in that kind of way is really important. We also have to have honest dialogue and conversation about things, because one of the things that's glaring is that as Americans, we haven't come to terms with our history. Doesn't mean we have to live in it, but we have to acknowledge it. Otherwise, we'll keep repeating it, as often been said, right? So, we've had a history of racism in America. We've had a history of, there's been genocide. There's been all these things, the undercutting of work in America, right? So the people don't get paid a living wage. These are things that undermine people's lives. And as we take them seriously, we have to figure out a way to really support human life, right? So not turn a blind eye to that. So these injustices of the past and present, we have to rectify, because you can't live in a castle, right? You will be somehow impinged, your own life will be impinged in some deep way if you cannot reach out and help the people around you who are suffering. We are always in relationship to others. And I think that he would want us to continue to be bridge builders, and particularly go into the places where it's difficult, to have those difficult conversations, to not shy away from that. So I think he would say, let's be courageous and, try to have, respect and love for everybody, not as some, like slogan, but because doing so challenges us to become our best self, ultimately.
So many just wonderful gems of wisdom in there. Thank you, Bonnie, for that answer. And I think it's actually a perfect segue into another question that we have in the chat, and folks can probably see it, but it's from Jennifer Turrell. Thank you for submitting a question. And the question is, in this current social justice movement, what are some ways you feel we can address the issues of systemic and institutional racism, which is more insidious and nuanced, where laws are technically protecting people of color, but the enactment or follow through isn't present in many situations? Yeah.
Well, it's true. And I mean, unfortunately, this has been going on a long time in that way, where, the systems of racism, can continue. But I think it's about maybe picking or identifying one institution that you, again, have passion about, that you care about, and trying to work for justice there. So again, back to education. We have right now people who are looking to ban books, to take real history out of the history. At one point, I think in Texas, there was, they had Cesar Chavez in the books, and then there was some effort to take him out of the books. It's like, no, put it back in, right? So I think, education, again, is so important. So if education is an interest of yours, and it's important that we become educated, that is an institution that's critical, that we make sure that the information is there. One of the things I did when I was, coming along as a mom, I made sure when my kids were in school that the social studies they got was truly representative of everybody in the world, that was inclusive, right? So when the story about African Americans came up, I made sure that story did not start with enslaved people as American history. I made sure that my teachers, the teachers at my kids' school, knew that story began in Africa, with kings and queens and, great dynasties there, right? And that Black people contributed to this country from the very beginning, whether it's teaching people in South Carolina how to make rice paddies become prolific, or, even the idea of vaccination came from an African who was enslaved by one of the Puritans, Mather. But this was, a contribution. There's so many contributions we've made, but we don't hear about that still. So again, being inclusive in terms of education, if that's your thing, or criminal justice. I mean, again, that's something else. So I think picking that area could be health, picking something that you care about and really diving deep into that. So and align and finding who else is in that sphere too, because we need to really align ourselves with people who are doing good things. And there are lots of people doing great work in all these arenas. We just have to reach out, know that they're there. And if you find one thread, well, I was lucky when I first moved to LA to find a thread of Pastor Lawson. Who knew? And I was like, oh my goodness, this is what I've been looking for all my life. And, I started meeting people through him, and I've segued, and these are people who are lifelong friends now, and organizations. And so find your thing, your interest, and meet people who are doing that kind of work. And I think that will take you forward.
Amazing advice. And Bonnie, it's interesting in the last part of your response, I was going to say, you're such an example of that, being able to, I think, share the story of someone whose life and legacy should be known, right? And I think thanks to you, all of us on the call and on the gathering today really are enriched, learning more about, Whitney Young, and in our own, now in our spheres of influence, we get to carry that on. And so thank you for that beautiful answer. And, a couple of folks in the chat have asked, what was it that grounded Whitney Young, right? Someone said he was obviously a solid rock. He was grounded, right? And another person is referring to sort of the qualities or the underlying philosophy that was governing his life, or that was allowing him to navigate and create common ground with people of different views and beliefs. Because just as we've talked about, it's hard to do that. But what do you think, Bonnie, what was that underlying ground? What was the thing that was grounding him as he aimed to do his work?
My grandparents. Simply put. And honestly, that's why I wanted to do this film, because I knew that he had come through something, for example, being a soldier in a segregated army. Now think about that. You're going off to fight, possibly be killed or maimed, and you can't come back and eat in any restaurant you want. I just couldn't wrap my head around how anybody could do that. I just couldn't figure that out. So anyway, I wanted to tell his story because I knew how he became grounded, because I grew up in that same place in Kentucky when I was very young. That's where I spent my first couple of years of life with my grandparents. And they were awesome people. And so that example, my grandfather, when Uncle Whitney gets angry because he's told he can't eat in the restaurant he wants to eat in. And that's when my grandfather says, don't get mad, get smart, right? Because people who lived, think about African Americans who lived in segregated, the South or even the North, wherever, but they lived in, a very frightening environment, right? Where one wrong slip could end up you in jail or dead, or somewhere in between. So they had to, but at the same time, they had to maintain a sense of themselves they couldn't be shaken. So that they knew that they had worth, they had dignity. And so, that's how my grandparents operated in the world, and that's how they taught their children to operate. So one quick example, which is not in the film, my grandmother took her two daughters to town in Kentucky. And there were signs there saying colored women and white ladies. Now, if you knew my grandmother, she was always about being a lady, because again, you didn't have anything else, right? But your own dignity. That's what moved you forward. So when her girls saw these signs, and my grandmother read the signs, she turned to her daughter. She said, we're ladies, so I guess we have to go into the white ladies' room, right? So, this was the dignity that she carried forth. And same thing with my grandfather, don't get mad, get smart. And never let anybody drag you so low as to hate them, which is also important because people right now are, hurt and angry and get mad and, and what he was saying is, no, don't let anybody drag you to that point. So there was this idea of dignity that you had to maintain at all points because that meant your survival, literally. And so that's how I think Uncle Whitney got grounded, and how when he was negotiating in boardrooms where they had not seen a Black American like that before at all, as a peer, he had to, really, help in those environments to really help people understand that he was, just a guy like them. He had to use humor to do that. He kept dignity. And one other quick story about that I like. A lot of these things weren't in the film, so I get a chance to say the stuff that was on the cutting room floor. When he was on that trip to Eastern Europe with the heads of Fortune 500 companies, Time Magazine and Henry Ford and all that. And one of the guys said, gee, they were on a bus together for weeks. And so they got to know him. And he was saying, and one of the guys said to him, pat him on the back, said, gee, Whitney, if more Negroes were like you, we wouldn't have any problem. And Uncle Whitney said, yeah. And he said, if more white people were like me, we wouldn't have any problem. Bada boom, so he would tell you what it was you needed to know, but still keep it light, keep going. So, the point is that he had that internal kind of confidence and strength and sense of self that he was not going to get swayed.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just a beautiful reminder of just the incredible generations of people and strength and power that not only Whitney Young, that came from, but you came from, and I'm sure so many of us on the line have come from. So thank you for that and for that reminder. There's another question from someone who lived in Chicago and is very familiar with the success and high achievement of Whitney Young High School. Mm-hmm. And this person is asking, why do you believe that Mr. Young's impact and or accomplishments are often overlooked?
Well, that's a great question, because he was very much aware that he would not be perhaps as well known as Martin Luther King, for example. And he said, I may not be, the loudest, or you may not know me or whatever he said, but was I effective? He was a pragmatist, right? So he had the ability, and it's a rare ability, to take his ego out of it, and really put his sense of self-worth onto what he could accomplish. And because of that, sometimes he had to play a different kind of role. So he wasn't an orator. He did speak a lot, but he wasn't a preacher, right? That was not something he was raised to do. But he knew that he had a different role to play, and that was behind the scenes in the boardroom where deals are done. So he was able to move Lyndon Johnson to the point of creating this poverty program so we could have Head Start even today. So we may not see his name or know that, but his work, and Job Corps is still there, and even Medicaid, as Manning Marable was saying, those programs really saved so many lives. But that was largely, his work that he was pushing because he was a social worker. Right. That's the other part, too. He was a social worker who's different and focused. So he wasn't there to rally the troops so much as to make sure programs were created that would help people. So it's a different frame, but I don't think he would mind just having the kind of legacy that he has for what we see today.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bonnie. And, it's amazing. Actually, we have someone here on the line who just and introduced themselves in the chat, saying that they're a proud alumni of Whitney M. Young High School. So shout outs to you, Melissa. Thank you for being here. And
Go Dolphins. That's all I know.
Go Dolphins. All right. So we have, yes, Melissa says yes. And actually someone else offered a private comment as well and just said that they so much enjoyed this presentation and are very interested in Whitney Sr. and his school, and wondered if you'd ever consider doing another documentary about him.
Well, that's an interesting question. My son, who was the filmmaker on this project, wanted to do a follow-up about Lincoln Institute, because I know it does grab people's attention quite a bit. It's interesting. I actually did my master's thesis on the school because that school was born out of a Supreme Court decision that really reestablished segregation in 1904. And then, it's just this whole arc to where it is today. Now it's the Whitney Young Job Corps Center in Kentucky. It's in that same spot, but it's been renamed after him. So I do think there's a really strong and interesting history. So I don't know the answer to that. I would consider that, especially if my son would like to pick that up, definitely. But I do think there's some interesting examples that we have here even today from that school. So that school was a boarding high school. And because of segregation, there were so few Blacks in Kentucky because, the crop was tobacco, it wasn't cotton. So you didn't need as many people to pick the fields. So there were so few people of color in a particular town, they sent all their money to one school, and that was Lincoln Institute, or there's also one in the city, Central High School, I think, in the city of Louisville. But anyway, because of Lincoln was a residential school, everybody got to be on the same page. And no matter what their background was, and my grandparents were kind of like the grandparents for all of those 400, the parents, I should say, for 400 kids. Here in Los Angeles, there's a school that's going to be built soon, is maybe 2022, I think. It's called Seed LA. There are other seed in schools where they have the same idea of taking kids from low income neighborhoods and putting them in a residential neighborhood where they get great academic training as well as practical skills if they want to go into trades. And that school is happening now. So I think the model I see from the past is still very applicable to what we have here now and can really help move up a whole nother generation to great outcomes for their life.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And the person who asked the question, I'm sure as many other people on the line would love to see a part 2. So if your son or anyone else, our eyes and ears will be out for that, looking out for Bonnie. But truly, I think being able to witness and just really and learn and hear and experience the documentary today was, truly just deeply moving and meaningful. So thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left, just doing a quick time check for this Q&A portion before we close out today. And there's still a few more questions. So maybe I'll move on to this question, which is, in the film, a couple of times, Whitney Young's spirit of accomplishing what is right, not just being for what is right, but actually doing what is right. This was referenced numerous times throughout the film. So 2 people are asking related questions. And so I'll summarize them as follows. How do you carry that spirit out, right? How do you pull forth the courage to do what's right every day? And how can we'd love to hear just about your own experience. I think you've referenced it actually multiple times today, but would love to hear about how you, really move with this sense of living out his legacy and acting with courage to do what is right.
That's a really great question. It's not an easy one to answer because I challenge myself every day to overcome my own doubts and insecurities and can I really do this kind of thing? Because when you're trying to do the right thing, there are always obstacles, right? Most of them, of course, are internal, right? They're not really external. But I have been passionate for all my life for peace and justice. I mean, it makes me crazy that people are not loved and respected. And, I think the world is so beautiful and I love nature and it works. So let's make it work. Let's have clean skies and, all that stuff. So, I try in my work, what I've done is I'm a journalist and I've tried to tell stories about things that are going on that are of concern to me. So, children who are in homes where they have lead paint poisoning, right now in LA, for example, there's just so many issues, gun violence and so many things. I just try to lift these stories up to an audience so more people know what's going on. But also in that very same story, I really focus on people who are working to improve the situation because, there's always got to be hope. And there is great hope there. So, for example, I've done a lot of stories on juveniles who were formerly incarcerated. And, and I've had to do this during the pandemic, of course, so it's been interesting, but one of the people that I focused on was a young man who had been in and out of the justice system for a very, very long time. Anyway, when he was in jail, he went to a writing program. And when he came out, he really was able to articulate what writing did for him to stabilize him. And now he's got a great job, he's moving forward in his life and all that. But he was talking about how, all the confusion and the drama, and usually it's also trauma that's there. He said, by the time it comes through your brain and out through the page, you've lost a lot of that, right? And so I thought, well, that's so interesting. And like I said, he's proof, right? There's another young woman who, was in foster care when she was 7, and she basically was in and out of the justice system until she was in her 20s. Lost custody of her child, all of that. But again, she had people to help her when she got out. And so now she is going to be a substance abuse counselor. She's in school for that. She has got an apartment. She used to live on the street. She has an apartment. She drives. I mean, she's gotten her life together. But I wanted to show people that these problems can be solved, but we have to have examples of that. So that's in my way, that what I try to do is just to show these little vignettes of people who, whether it's the person who's helping or is being helped, everybody benefits. And more importantly, also the dignity of every single life. So just really quickly, when we see people who are without shelter, a lot of times, say here in Los Angeles, large percentage of the women who are there because of domestic violence, like 90% are there because of domestic violence. And so what we tend to do when we see people who are without means or without shelter in this case, we tend to evaluate the person as like, oh, what's wrong with that person, right? That's kind of an instinct. But instead of seeing, well, no, there are systems that are broken here, number one. And also what you're looking at is a domestic violence issue at its core. So how do we fix that upstream, right? So just kind of unpacking this a little bit. That's what I try to do in my own work.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. And I think this theme of really finding our own spheres of influence and digging into the thing that we're passionate about and figuring out how we can do work to ensure that the arc of justice, right, or the arc bends toward justice in our own unique ways. I think that theme is really coming out loud and clear. And I just want to appreciate just everything you've shared. And maybe I can ask one final question to close us out. But first, again, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be in conversation with you. And thanks to everyone who's listening. And thanks to all of you who asked questions, such wonderful questions. So Bonnie, this, yes, there are also chats or comments in the chat just expressing appreciation to you and everything that you've shared, including someone who's saying that they were able to they learned of the name and legacy of Whitney Young Jr. through a scholarship from the New York Urban League. And they also sponsored a tour of HBCUs, which this person was sent on, and they later garnered a full scholarship to Florida A&M. So they say they thank you they thank your uncle for his incredible work. So yeah, what a beautiful comment to receive as we close out our time together. So Bonnie, maybe in the last 5 minutes, I got goosebumps reading that comment. It's so moving. So in the last 5 minutes, one other theme that we heard throughout the film was that Whitney Young was referred to as someone who really aimed to keep everyone in the room, right? And finding strategies that came out of everyone working together. And this is a challenging thing to do, right? How do we hold space for everyone? Or how do we really enable people to really fundamentally work together to come up with a strategy? So I would love for you to close out our time together by sharing about, Whitney Young's legacy of holding space for everyone. And how can we learn from that as we aim to really experience and create equity in whatever sphere we're in? Can you close out with some remarks about that, Bonnie?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I want to say about Whitney Young, which I was actually schooled on by Dorothy Height when I interviewed her, because I said to her, Uncle Whitney was able to keep, Martin King and, all the people who were in that inner circle together, even though at some points there was tension. And I said, I know he's charismatic. What do you think? And she looked at me and she said, he was a social worker. And I was like, okay. So that was like, what it meant to me was, it wasn't just his personality, it was the skill set that he learned from being a social worker. And a social worker is not somebody who's trying to put themselves forward, right? It's not, their ego is not there. Their job is to keep people at the table, to move back. And so he was looking at things in a very different way than maybe a lawyer would, or a preacher would, or somebody else. The optimistic thing for me in that is that we can teach these skills to each other, to, whether it's brokering or mediation or whatever that is, there are skill sets that can be taught. And those are things I think we all need to learn. We can learn them in schools when kids are young. They can learn how to play, share, kind of thing, but also to keep that theme going throughout life, throughout, certainly in education. Education, again, is one of these places where you spend a lot of time, going through, all the grammar school, all the way to graduate school, where we can really find not just what job am I going to get? Because that's when it starts getting kind of weird, right? My father said, he said, education right now is like a trade school. He was very unhappy with it because when he was at school, people were learning about ethics, and you had to take ethics, right, and philosophy, and so the idea that we have a vision that's broad is really important. So I think that helps to tamp down our ego, right? And so I think the final thing I would say about that is to, so again, to really learn skill sets that keep people at the table. But in order to do that, I think we need to have this grand vision, our greater self, if you will. And one of the things that I would share with everybody is something Langston Hughes said that really always is great, and something that I like a lot. And it goes to the point of our conversation this whole time about America. He said, America was never America to me. And yet, I swear this oath, America will be. So in that one or two lines, he's saying, this is a vision of hope for the greatness of humanity. How great can we be as human beings, right? But he says, even though I've been disappointed, he said, I will make sure, it's my vow. He uses the word vow, that America will be. In other words, it's a handmade thing. So I think if we hold on to this vision, and also appreciation for the fact that we, again, were born at this time, each one of us right now, to do the work, whether it's saving our right to vote, whether it's protecting our children, whatever it is, find that space that you want to occupy and put your whole life into it. I think that's the best way to keep everybody and yourself at the table.
Thank you, Bonnie. Just deepest appreciation to you for your time, your wisdom, and your deeply moving and heartfelt insights. I am sure I speak for everyone who joined in today when I just express our deepest appreciation. So we thank you. And with that, I will pass it back to Ian, who will close us out. Thank you again, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you so much, Bonnie. Oh, it's been 1 year and 1 week since the storming of the US Capitol by a mob who sought to violently stop the ratification of the valid collective vote of a duly elected president. I must express my own personal disappointments in the delayed progress of proposed federal bills that will better protect civil and voting rights of all Americans. It's especially disappointing considering how many Black people, how many people of color, how many poor people are being disenfranchised right now across this country by so many legal shenanigans. It's been 22 months since George Floyd's murder, 18 months since Breonna Taylor was killed by a policeman's bullet. As Ms. Boswell makes clear, Whitney Young shouted from the mountaintop that Black lives matter. As Barack Obama said, it's important to us to understand that the phrase Black Lives Matter refers to the notion that there's a specific vulnerability for African Americans that needs to be addressed. It's not meant to suggest that other lives don't matter. It's to suggest that other folks aren't experiencing this particular vulnerability. In Bonnie Boswell's inspiring production, The Powerbroker, we get a sense of how one inspiring man addressed that particular and often horrendous vulnerability. We learned that improving civil rights, political rights, economic rights of one group in this country, we will improve democracy for all. Young exemplifies how these were all connected and how all of us can fight for their rectification. Clearly, peaceful global citizenship begins at home. It begins at Soka University of America. It begins in our home and in our home countries. It begins in America. For more than for almost 250 years, the citizens of the United States have been called upon to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Ms. Boswell and the remarkable story of her uncle shows that which should unite Americans and the people across the world is to have the right and protection of true political and economic democracy. America will be. Bonnie has called on our students to cultivate the seeking mind, not the settling mind. She advises to exchange tough ideas, disagree, change views, create a grand vision, and for the passion of challenging oneself. While she directs that graceful advice to our students, it is so apt 3 days before Martin Luther King's 93rd birthday, so apt for all of us. I'm humbled by this remarkable event and deeply honored to help open and close it. In ending, please let me express our collective gratitude for everyone here. First, thank you, Bonnie, for sharing your amazing work, your inspiring dignity, the story of your uncle Whitney Young. You give us hope through his enduring legacy.
Thank you.
Our gratitude also goes to President Ed Feasel and Vice President Michael Weiner for supporting events like this, supporting the work of the Center for Race and Ethnicity and Human Rights at Soka University, and our excellent faculty and student fellows. Kevin and Maya, thank you for your thoughtful, provoking questions and beautifully moderated interviews. Kevin was really the author and executive producer of this idea, and I was just very proud and privileged to ride in his bus here. We had a great production crew behind the scenes. Thank you, Karen, Sam, and Martin. Our largest appreciation goes out to our audience who took the time to be here today on this beautiful blue-skied Friday afternoon in Southern California. We hope to interest our public community and to serve our students at Soka University of America. As Ms. Boswell so eloquently says in our film and interview, such essential work remains as yet unfinished. So I'm not ending this event. I am opening your 3-day weekend. I hope you have a safe and pleasant evening, and please go well.